"I'd trade 10 herds just to feel you once," the cowboy whispered to the lonely widow. Ethan had lived on the plains for as long as he could remember. His ranch was far from any town, surrounded by rolling hills and wide open fields that seemed to stretch endlessly under the sky. Most days were quiet, almost painfully quiet. The only sounds were the soft rustle of grass in the wind, the distant lowing of his cattle, and the occasional creak of the old wooden fences. He had grown used to the silence, even found comfort in it, but deep inside there was a hollowness he could never quite fill. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and strong from years of riding and working the land. His hands were calloused, and his face bore the sun and wind of countless days spent outdoors. Though many would have called him tough, there was a softness in his eyes that few ever saw. That softness was hidden behind the armor of solitude he had built after losing the people he cared about most. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the ranch, Ethan spotted a figure in the distance. At first he thought it was one of the travelers who occasionally passed through the area, but as the figure drew closer he realized it was a woman. She was small and worn from the road, her clothes dusted with dirt, and her eyes carried a sadness that made Ethan pause. Something about her presence felt different, unexpected, yet familiar, like a quiet note in a song he had forgotten. Clara had been traveling for days. Her home had been lost to a fire, and her husband, the only family she had left, had died suddenly a year ago. She had tried to keep going, to rebuild her life somewhere new, but loneliness had followed her like a shadow. When she saw the light of Ethan's ranch in the distance, she felt a flicker of hope. She had nowhere else to go, and she could not bear another night under the cold, empty sky. Gathering her strength, she walked up the dirt path toward the small wooden cabin. Ethan watched silently from the porch as she approached. He had never expected visitors, certainly not someone so clearly vulnerable. His instinct was to tell her to move along, to leave his life unchanged, but as he looked into her eyes, something inside him stirred. There was a quiet courage in her step, a fragile determination that mirrored his own long-ago struggle to survive. When she finally reached the porch, she hesitated, unsure whether he would welcome her or chase her away. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. I need a place to rest for the night. I have nowhere else to go."
Ethan studied her for a long moment.
The ranch had always been his refuge, a place where he could avoid the world. But now, confronted with her vulnerability, he felt an unfamiliar tug in his chest. He nodded, not saying a word, and stepped aside to let her in. The cabin was modest, just a single room with a fireplace, a small bed, and a table. It smelled faintly of wood smoke and leather, comforting in its simplicity. Clara's eyes swept the room, taking in every detail. She could sense the quiet strength of the man who lived here, the care he put into his home, and the way the sun painted warm patterns across the floor. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan grunted in acknowledgement. Words were not his strong suit, and he had never been one to express himself easily. But he watched as Clara set down her worn bag and began to make herself comfortable, and he felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through him. They ate a simple dinner of bread, cheese, and stew. Clara tried to make conversation, asking about the ranch, the cattle, and the long days he spent alone. Ethan answered in short sentences at first, but slowly the words began to flow more easily. He told her about the life he had built, the struggles of keeping the ranch running, and the quiet moments that made him feel alive. Clara listened intently, offering her own stories in return, tales of her husband, the farm they had lost, and the days she had spent wandering from place to place. As the evening deepened, a gentle silence settled between them. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting shadows across the wooden walls. Ethan found himself studying Clara without realizing it, how she moved with a quiet grace, how her eyes reflected both sadness and strength, how her presence seemed to fill the empty spaces of the cabin. He had spent years avoiding connection, fearing the pain it might bring, yet now he could not ignore the pull he felt toward her. Clara, too, felt something she had not felt in a long time, a sense of safety, of being seen. Even in her brokenness, she had wandered through so much pain. Yet here, in this remote cabin, she felt a flicker of hope that perhaps she could find a place to belong, if only for a while. Night fell, and the wind whispered through the trees outside. Ethan offered her the bed while he slept in a chair by the fire. Clara hesitated, sensing the man's pride and independence, but he simply gestured for her to take it. As she lay down, she felt a strange comfort in the quiet presence of this stranger who had offered her shelter. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself unable to sleep. He sat in the dim light, staring into the flames, thinking about the twists of fate that had brought her to his doorstep. He had spent so long guarding his heart, believing that solitude was safer than loss. Yet, as he watched her resting peacefully, he realized that maybe, just maybe, some risks were worth taking. Outside, the stars stretched across the sky, endless and bright, reflecting the vastness of the plains. Ethan thought about the days ahead, about the work and the loneliness, and he wondered if this quiet woman could change everything he had known about life. He did not yet know how or when, but a seed of something new had been planted in his heart. As the wind died down and the night deepened, the cabin held only the soft sound of Clara's breathing and the occasional pop from the fire. Both of them were awake in their own ways, one reflecting on past grief, the other cautiously opening to the possibility of something more. In that quiet room, a bond had begun to form, fragile yet undeniable, marking the first chapter of a story neither had expected, but both would come to cherish. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the hills, Ethan was already up tending to the cattle and preparing the ranch for the day. Clara joined him outside, shivering slightly in the morning chill. She watched him move with quiet admiration, seeing the strength and skill honed by years of hard work. He noticed her gaze and gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement that he had noticed her watching. They moved through the morning chores together, and for the first time the silence between them felt natural, comfortable, not lonely. Words were not always necessary. Each gesture, each shared task spoke volumes. As the sun rose higher, painting the plains with gold, both Ethan and Clara realized that this chance meeting might be the beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. Though the world outside remained harsh and uncertain, inside the small wooden cabin, a quiet transformation had begun. Ethan's guarded heart was opening, and Clara's weary soul had found a place of refuge. The plain stretched endlessly around them, but for the first time the vastness did not feel lonely. It felt full of possibilities. The days after Clara's arrival passed quietly, but they were far from ordinary. Life on the ranch had always been routine for Ethan, filled with chores and the endless care of the land and animals. Now, with Clara around, even the simplest tasks carried a new meaning. She was eager to help, and although she lacked the experience of a rancher, she approached everything with determination and a willingness to learn. Ethan watched her closely, noting how she handled herself around the animals. She was cautious but confident, moving gently with the horses and careful when feeding the cattle. He found himself correcting her only when it was necessary, and each time he did it with patience rather than frustration. It surprised him how much he enjoyed her company, how natural it felt to have her nearby. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the familiar pang of isolation that had haunted him since his brother had died and the ranch had become his only family. Clara, in turn, found comfort in the routines of ranch life. There was something grounding about the chores, the rhythm of work from sunrise to sunset. She liked the smell of hay in the morning, the sound of the horses' hooves on the dirt, and even the soft lowing of the cattle. More than that, she liked the quiet strength of Ethan. He was not a man of many words, but his actions spoke louder than any conversation. He was steady, dependable, and unwavering. For someone who had been so uncertain of the world, it was a relief to be near someone so solid. Their days were filled with work, but there were moments of small joys, too. One afternoon, while mending a broken fence together, they shared stories about their pasts. Ethan spoke sparingly at first, sharing bits of his childhood on the plains, the bond he had shared with his brother, and the loneliness he had endured since losing him. Clara listened intently, her own eyes soft with understanding. When it was her turn, she spoke of the farm she had lost, the love she had shared with her husband, and the difficult journey that had brought her to Ethan's doorstep. It was not an easy conversation. Both of them carried pain that they had tried to bury for years, and now it was surfacing slowly, like the first light of dawn over the plains. Yet there was a comfort in sharing, in knowing that the other understood without judgment. Each story brought them closer, building a fragile trust that neither had expected. Evenings were quiet, filled with small routines that allowed them to connect in subtle ways. Clara would prepare simple meals while Ethan repaired equipment or tended to the horses. Sometimes they would sit by the fire after supper, the warmth and flickering light providing a space for unspoken thoughts. Words were not always necessary. A shared glance, a gentle touch on the shoulder, or even a smile was enough to convey feelings they could not yet say aloud. One particular evening, after a long day of repairing fences and tending to the animals, Clara noticed how tired Ethan looked. His hands were covered in calluses and small cuts, his shirt damp with sweat from the summer heat. Without thinking, she fetched a cloth and a small bowl of water and began cleaning his hands. Ethan stiffened at first, unused to such care, but he did not pull away. He watched her work, noticing the careful attention she gave each movement, and for a moment, he felt a warmth that he had not felt in years. "You take care of yourself, too, you know," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "I know," he replied, his voice low and steady, though not entirely convincing. Clara smiled, sensing the barrier in his words. She did not press further. She had learned that patience was important with Ethan. He would open up in his own time, in his own way, and she was willing to wait. The trust between them grew slowly, strengthened by shared work and quiet companionship. One morning as the sun rose over the plains, Ethan asked Clara to help him round up the cattle. It was a task that required teamwork, communication, and a certain level of courage. She agreed, eager to prove herself, and together they moved through the fields, their movements synchronized in an unspoken rhythm. As they worked, Ethan noticed how naturally Clara adapted to the life of the ranch. She was quick to learn, careful with the animals, and fearless in the face of challenges. It impressed him. And more than that, it drew him closer to her. He found himself stealing glances when she was not looking, noticing the way her hair caught the sunlight, the determination in her eyes, and the gentle strength in her movements. Ah! Clara, too, noticed changes in Ethan. He was no longer just the distant, stoic cowboy she had first met. He smiled more often, offered small words of encouragement, and even laughed at times. She felt a sense of pride and warmth in knowing that her presence had brought this change, that she had begun to chip away at the walls he had built around his heart. Their bond was not without challenges. There were moments of tension, when frustration or exhaustion would take over, or when memories of past losses would surface unexpectedly. Yet even in those moments they found ways to support each other. Ethan would offer quiet reassurance, while Clara would listen patiently, allowing him space to express himself without fear of judgment. One evening, after a long day, a sudden summer storm rolled across the plains. The sky darkened, and heavy rain began to fall, accompanied by fierce wind and distant thunder. Ethan and Clara rushed to secure the animals and protect the barn. In the chaos, Clara slipped and twisted her ankle. Ethan was immediately at her side, helping her to her feet and guiding her to the safety of the barn. Inside the barn, the storm raged on, the wind howling and the rain pelting the roof. Ethan made a small fire in the corner to keep them warm, and they sat together on a bale of hay, catching their breath. Clara looked up at him, grateful and slightly embarrassed. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the storm. Ethan nodded, his hand brushing against hers for a brief moment. It was a small gesture, but it carried more meaning than words could express. They sat in silence for a while, the storm outside a reminder of the unpredictability of life, and the warmth of the barn offering a sense of safety and connection they both craved. Over the next few weeks their routines continued, but the closeness between them grew stronger. They began to share more of their thoughts and feelings, sometimes in words, sometimes in quiet gestures. Each day brought small victories, an encouraging word, a shared laugh, a moment of comfort during a difficult task. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a place of connection, healing, and tentative hope. Ethan began to realize that he was no longer just tolerating Clara's presence, he was seeking it. He found himself looking forward to her company, noticing the little things she did that brought life to the ranch. Clara, in turn, felt a sense of belonging she had not experienced in years. She had found not just shelter, but a companion, someone who understood her in ways no one else had. One quiet evening, after the work was done and the animals were settled, Ethan and Clara sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the hills. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, the plains glowing in the fading light. Ethan reached out and offered his hand to Clara. She took it, their fingers intertwining naturally. It was a small act, but it spoke volumes. Trust, connection, and a slowly growing affection. As night fell and the stars appeared, they sat together in comfortable silence. The bond between them had strengthened, not through grand gestures or dramatic events, but through shared work, quiet understanding, and the gentle unfolding of trust. Both of them had faced loss and hardship, yet together they found moments of peace, hope, and a growing sense that perhaps the loneliness that had defined their lives was beginning to fade. By the end of Part 2, Ethan and Clara had not yet admitted their feelings aloud, but the signs were clear. Their days were filled with cooperation and subtle intimacy, their nights with quiet reflection and growing affection. They were learning to rely on each other, to trust in the possibility that life could be more than survival. It could be connection, love, and shared strength. The ranch, once a symbol of solitude and endurance, had become a place of growth, healing, and hope. And for the first time in years, both Ethan and Clara allowed themselves to imagine a future together, one built on trust, understanding, and the slow but steady blossoming of something neither had dared to name yet. The days had grown longer, and the nights on the ranch colder as autumn slowly gave way to winter. Ethan and Clara had settled into a rhythm, sharing work and small moments of quiet companionship. The bond between them had grown stronger, but neither had spoken aloud the feelings that had been building quietly in their hearts. There was a tension beneath the calm, a longing that neither could yet name, a desire that was both frightening and irresistible. One evening, a storm approached the plains. The sky darkened early, clouds rolling across the horizon like an ocean of gray, and the wind began to rise. Ethan had been checking the fences when he saw Clara struggling to secure a gate against the gusts of wind. He hurried to her side, grabbing the latch before it could slam shut. The sudden closeness made them both pause, their eyes meeting for a brief moment that seemed to stretch longer than it should. "Careful," Ethan said, his voice low but firm.
"This wind can be dangerous if you're not ready for it." Clara nodded, gripping the gate tightly.
"I can handle it," she replied, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her words.
They worked together quickly, securing the animals and making sure the barn doors were latched against the storm. The first drops of rain began to fall as they moved inside, the wind howling outside like a living thing. Ethan helped Clara to a bale of hay, and they watched as the storm raged around the ranch, the distant clap of thunder echoing across the plains. Inside the barn, the air was warm and smelled faintly of hay and leather. The rain drummed on the roof a steady, almost hypnotic rhythm. Clara sat close to Ethan, her legs pulled beneath her, shivering slightly despite the fire he had built. He draped a blanket over her shoulders, and their hands brushed as he adjusted it. Both felt the spark of that touch, a warmth that went far beyond the physical comfort of the blanket. They sat in silence for a few moments, listening to the storm. Ethan's mind was racing, filled with words he had never dared to say aloud. He had spent so many years alone, guarding his heart, but now the presence of Clara, the gentleness in her eyes, the strength in her quiet resilience, made him realize that he could not remain silent any longer. "Clara," he began, his voice almost lost in the sound of the rain. She looked up at him, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "There's something I need to tell you, something I've been holding inside for a long time." She tilted her head, her eyes wide but patient. "You can tell me anything, Ethan," she said softly. He swallowed, struggling to find the right words. For a long moment he said nothing, afraid that speaking aloud would shatter the fragile connection they had built. Finally he took a deep breath, and the words tumbled out, raw. "I've been alone for so long," he said, his voice rough with emotion. I've spent years keeping to myself thinking that solitude was safer than loss. But being near you,
It's different. I feel...
something I haven't felt in years. Something I can't ignore. Clara reached out, placing her hand gently on his arm. "Ethan," she whispered, encouraging him to continue. He looked into her eyes, searching for understanding, for some sign that he would not be rejected.
"I'd trade 10 herds just to feel you once," he admitted, his voice low and trembling.
To hold you, to be near you, to know that
"I'm not alone anymore."
you've changed everything, Clara. You've made me want more than this lonely life, more than just survival. For a moment there was only silence. The storm continued outside, but inside the barn, time seemed to pause. Clara's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of recognition and understanding. She had felt the same pull, the same longing, but had been too cautious, too wary of opening herself to hope. Now, hearing Ethan's words, all her fears seemed to melt away. She leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "Ethan, I've felt the same way. I've been afraid to say it, afraid that I'd be disappointed. But being with you, it feels like home. I don't want to be alone anymore, not with you." The tension that had been building between them broke like a dam. Ethan reached out, taking her hand in his, holding it firmly but gently. He could feel the warmth of her skin, the rapid beat of her heart, and it sent a shiver through him. Slowly, carefully, he moved closer, their faces inches apart, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to be vulnerable. Clara met him halfway, leaning into him, their foreheads touching. It was not a dramatic gesture, not a sudden leap into passion, but a quiet, deliberate act of trust and intimacy. They sat there together, listening to the storm, feeling the warmth and connection that had grown between them over weeks of shared work and quiet companionship. Hours passed. The storm eventually subsided, leaving behind a calm that felt almost sacred. Ethan and Clara remained in the barn, holding each other, speaking softly about hopes, fears, and dreams for the future. The night was filled with gentle confessions and shared memories, each word strengthening the bond between them. Ethan realized that this moment was more than a fleeting feeling. It was a turning point. He had long believed that love was too dangerous, that opening himself to someone else's heart would only bring more pain. But now, with Clara beside him, he understood that love was also a source of strength, a reason to face the world, to endure hardships, and to find joy in the simplest moments. Clara, too, felt a transformation within herself. The grief that had weighed heavily on her heart for years began to lift, replaced by a cautious but growing hope. She had come to the ranch seeking shelter from the world, and she had found something far more precious, someone who truly saw her, someone who could share both her burdens. By the time dawn approached, the barn was quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of breathing and the gentle rustle of hay. Ethan and Clara remained close, wrapped in each other's presence, neither wanting to break the fragile yet undeniable connection they had found. They did not speak of what the future might hold. It was enough to be together in that moment, to acknowledge the feelings that had long been unspoken, and to trust that the bond they had formed could grow stronger with time. When the first light of morning filtered through the barn doors, Ethan and Clara rose together, still holding hands. The storm had passed, leaving the plains washed and glistening, the air crisp and clear. There was a sense of renewal, not just in the world around them, but within themselves. They had faced their fears, admitted their feelings, and allowed themselves to be vulnerable in ways that neither had expected. As they stepped outside, the sun breaking over the hills, they felt a quiet joy that came from knowing they were no longer alone. Their connection had deepened beyond friendship, beyond companionship. It was something profound, built on trust, respect, and the courage to open their hearts. The days that followed carried a new energy. Every chore, every shared meal, every quiet moment on the porch was colored by the awareness of what had been confessed in the barn. Ethan and Clara moved through life with a shared purpose, a sense of partnership that went beyond words. They laughed more easily, spoke more freely, and allowed themselves small gestures of affection. A brush of the hand, a warm smile, a soft touch that strengthened the bond they had declared to each other during that stormy night. Even the ranch itself seemed to respond to their connection. The horses were calmer, the cattle easier to manage, and the work, though still hard, felt lighter when shared. Both Ethan and Clara found themselves more patient, more willing to see beauty in small details, the pattern of frost on a fence, the quiet flight of a hawk across the plains, the way the firelight danced on wooden walls. These moments, once unnoticed in their lives of solitude, now carried meaning and warmth. Though challenges remained, the harshness of winter, the responsibilities of the ranch, and the lingering memories of past losses, Ethan and Clara faced them together. They had learned that love was not about perfection or grand gestures, but about showing up, caring, and being willing to share both joy and sorrow. Each day strengthened their bond, and each night they returned to the comfort of each other's presence, knowing that they had found something rare and precious in a world that often felt unforgiving.
By the end of part 3, their hearts had fully acknowledged the depth of their feelings.
Ethan had expressed his longing, Clara had reciprocated, and together they had crossed a threshold that could not be undone. The stormy night had acted as both a literal and symbolic turning point, washing away fear and leaving clarity, trust, and a shared desire for a future built together. Winter had fully arrived on the plains, bringing with it long, cold nights and mornings frosted with ice. The wind cut sharply across the ranch, but inside the small wooden cabin and barn, warmth and life had taken root. Ethan and Clara moved through their days with a new energy, a sense of purpose and connection that had been missing for years. Life on the ranch was still hard, but now every task carried a subtle joy that had not existed before. Mornings began early. Ethan would rise before sunrise, the chill in the air making his breath visible as he stepped outside to tend the horses and check the fences. Clara would follow shortly after, bundling herself in layers against the cold. They worked together side by side, and in those shared moments, their partnership grew stronger. Ethan began to notice things about Clara that he had missed before. The way she laughed at small surprises, how she quietly soothed the animals, and the determination in her eyes whenever she faced a difficult task. Clara, too, observed Ethan with a new sense of appreciation. The stoic man she had first met now showed patience, tenderness, and even humor. She loved the way he moved with purpose around the ranch, the strength in his hands as he worked the cattle, and the soft way he treated the animals that were under his care. More than that, she cherished the moments when he would pause, glance at her, and offer a small, meaningful smile, a silent acknowledgement that they were in this together. Their days were filled with chores, but the work became a form of intimacy. When mending fences, they would exchange glances and quiet words, the rhythm of their labor blending with the rhythm of their hearts. When feeding the animals, Clara would lean close to Ethan, and he would feel the warmth of her body, a gentle reminder of the connection they had built. Even the simplest tasks, a shared meal, gathering firewood, or brushing the horses, became moments of closeness and trust. One particularly cold afternoon, a harsh wind swept across the plains, bringing snow in jagged flurries. The cattle needed to be moved to a sheltered pasture, and Ethan and Clara set out together. Clara struggled at first with the cold and the heavy coats she had to wear, but Ethan stayed close, guiding her through the work. When a cow broke away from the group, they worked as one to gently steer it back, their movements coordinated without the need for many words. After the cattle were safely sheltered, they returned to the cabin, breathless and flushed from exertion. Clara stripped off her layers and hung them by the fire to dry. Ethan watched her quietly, feeling an almost overwhelming sense of gratitude and admiration. He had spent so long alone, believing he could survive in solitude, yet now he realized that this partnership, this companionship, was what made life worth living. As evening approached, the cabin glowed with warmth from the fireplace. Clara prepared a simple meal while Ethan repaired a broken gate outside. When he finished, he joined her at the table, and they ate in companionable silence. The firelight danced across their faces, highlighting expressions of contentment and quiet happiness. Neither needed to speak much. The bond between them was clear in every glance and gesture. After dinner, they often sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the plains stretch endlessly under the starry sky. The cold was sharp, but it did not matter, they had each other. Clara rested her head against Ethan's shoulder, and he placed an arm around her, holding her close. In those moments, they did not need words to express what they felt. Trust, love, and a shared understanding filled the spaces between them. One night, as snow fell gently around the cabin, Clara shared a story from her past that she had never told anyone. It spoke of the farm she and her husband had worked so hard to maintain, the years of love and struggle, and the sudden fire that had taken it all away. Her voice trembled at times, but Ethan listened silently, holding her hand as she spoke. When she finished, he pulled her close, holding her tightly, offering the comfort he had once believed he could never give or receive.
"You've been through so much," he said softly.
"I can't change the past, but I want to be here for the future. I want us to face it together." And she whispered, "I want that too. I never thought I could feel safe again, but with you, I do." The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. They began to share small dreams and plans for the future. Ethan spoke of improving the barn, planting a garden for Clara, and maybe even adding a small orchard. Clara, in turn, shared ideas for caring for the land and animals, ways to make the ranch more comfortable and sustainable. Together, they imagined a life that was not just about surviving, but thriving, building a home and a life that they could call their own. Even the harshest winter days brought moments of joy. One afternoon, a sudden snowstorm forced them to stay inside the cabin. They spent hours talking, sharing stories, and laughing. Clara suggested they play a game of cards, and though Ethan was hesitant at first, he found himself enjoying the light-hearted competition. Laughter echoed in the small cabin, mingling with the sound of the wind and the crackle of the fire. For both of them, it was a reminder that joy could exist even in the most difficult times. As the winter weeks passed, their connection deepened in ways that were quiet but profound. Clara began to see the softer side of Ethan, the man who, despite years of hardship and solitude, had a heart capable of great tenderness and care. Ethan, in turn, saw the strength and resilience in Clara, the woman who had faced loss and fear yet still opened her heart to life and love. Together they complemented each other, balancing strength with compassion, determination with patience. One morning, Ethan woke to find Clara already awake, watching the sunrise from the porch. He joined her, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. They stood side by side watching the sky turn pink and gold over the plains. Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had never imagined that life could hold such beauty, such connection. Clara smiled at him, her eyes reflecting the soft light of dawn, and in that moment, no words were necessary. They had found something rare and enduring in each other. As winter slowly gave way to the first hints of spring, the ranch began to show signs of life once more. The snow melted, the grass began to green, and the first flowers appeared along the edges of the fields. Ethan and Clara worked together to prepare for the new season, planting seeds, repairing fences, and tending to the animals. Each task was infused with a sense of hope and purpose, a reminder that life continued and that they would face it together. Their evenings remained a time of quiet intimacy. They would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes simply holding each other in comfortable silence. The small cabin, once a place of solitude, had become a home filled with warmth, love, and the promise of shared days ahead. Ethan and Clara had discovered that healing was not about forgetting the past, but about facing it together, finding strength in each other, and building a life that honored both their histories and their hopes for the future. By the end of this period, Ethan and Clara had truly begun to heal together. Their love was no longer unspoken. It had grown through trust, shared work, and small acts of care. They had learned that life's hardships were easier to face when shared, and that love was not about perfection but about presence, patience, and understanding. They had created a partnership that was both tender and strong, one that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Spring had finally arrived on the plains. The snow had melted, leaving soft green grass that swayed gently in the morning breeze. Wild flowers peeked through the fields, and the sun shone warmly across the ranch. Ethan and Clara had settled into a rhythm of life together, their bond deepened by months of shared work, quiet companionship, and emotional honesty. The ranch was no longer just a place to survive. It had become a home, a sanctuary, and a symbol of the life they were building together. Despite the calm of the season, life was never without challenges. One morning, as Ethan rode toward the neighboring hills to check on the cattle, a familiar figure approached from the distant road. It was Tom, a neighboring rancher who had known Ethan for years. Tom was a practical man, always looking for ways to expand his own herd and business. In his hand, he carried an offer that could change Ethan's life. A chance to sell part of his land, gain wealth, and secure a comfortable future. Ethan dismounted slowly, his mind racing. He had worked the ranch for years, through harsh winters and droughts, building something that was entirely his. The offer was tempting. With the money, he could fix every fence, buy more cattle, and even expand the land. But as he thought of Clara, the image of her laughing beside the fire, helping him with chores, and walking with him across the green fields, he realized that wealth meant nothing if it meant leaving this life and leaving her. Clara noticed the change in Ethan's expression as he spoke with Tom. She approached quietly, her hand resting on his arm. "What is it?" she asked gently. Ethan shook his head, struggling to find the words. "Tom has offered me a deal," he said finally. "I could sell part of the ranch, gain a lot of money, and start over somewhere else. It's a good offer, Clara, and I've worked hard for years to earn something like this."
Clara looked at him, seeing the conflict in his eyes.
She knew that the ranch was not just land to him. It was a part of his life, his memories, his survival. But she also saw the pull of temptation, the possibility of a future made easier by money. She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Ethan," she said softly, "I won't tell you what to do. But I know one thing. This life we've built together, it matters more than money. I want you here, with me. I want us to stay, to keep building this life no matter how hard it is." Her words struck him like a spark in dry grass. Ethan realized that for the first time he had a choice that truly mattered. Not a choice between comfort and hardship, but between isolation and love, between a life lived alone and a life shared with someone who mattered more than anything else. His heart knew the answer, even if his mind hesitated. He turned to Tom, shaking his head. "I appreciate the offer," he said firmly, "but I can't leave. This land, this ranch, it's where I belong. And Clara, she's my reason to stay." Tom studied him for a moment, then nodded in understanding. He could see the determination in Ethan's eyes, and he knew that nothing he offered could compete with the bond Ethan had found. Tom tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Ethan and Clara alone in the quiet of the green plains. Ethan turned to Clara, his eyes softening. "You were right," he said. "This, us, it's worth more than anything else. I don't care about money, or land, or any other offer. I care about you." Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she threw her arms around him, holding him tightly. Ethan held her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his, the steady beat of her heart matching his own. It was a moment of pure connection, a culmination of months of struggle, trust, and slowly growing love. In the following weeks, Ethan and Clara poured their energy into the ranch, working side by side with renewed purpose. They repaired fences, planted gardens, and cared for the animals with a joy and dedication that made the land itself seem to thrive. The barn was cleaned and organized, the fields tended carefully, and the cabin was filled with laughter, conversation, and the soft hum of a life shared. Their love continued to grow, not in grand gestures, but in small, meaningful moments. Clara would leave notes for Ethan in the barn, reminding him to eat, rest, or take a break. Ethan would bring her small gifts from his trips to town, a hand-carved trinket, a piece of fabric for a quilt, or a bundle of wildflowers from the fields. Each gesture was a silent promise, a way of saying, "I see you, I care for you, I am here for you." One afternoon, as they walked together through the fields, Clara paused to look at Ethan. "Do you ever think about what life would have been like if I hadn't come here?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled, taking her hand. "I try not to think about it," he replied. "Because I don't want to imagine a life without you. You've made this place feel like home in ways I never thought possible." "I'd be lost without you." They continued walking, their hands entwined, the sun casting long shadows across the green fields. There was a quiet joy in simply being together, in knowing that they had chosen each other, and that together they could face whatever life threw at them. As spring turned into summer, the ranch flourished. The cattle were healthy, the crops were growing, and the orchard they had planted together began to bear its first fruits. Ethan and Clara worked tirelessly, but now the work was filled with a sense of purpose and satisfaction that neither had experienced alone. Every challenge they faced became a shared victory, every small success a testament to their partnership. Evenings were filled with quiet intimacy. They would sit on the porch watching the sunset over the hills, talking about their day, their hopes, and their dreams. Sometimes they would sit in silence, letting the beauty of the plains and the warmth of each other's presence speak for itself. In those moments they found peace, contentment, and a deep understanding that they had found something rare and enduring. One night, as fireflies danced across the fields, Ethan turned to Clara, a thoughtful expression on his face. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the future. About us. I know we've built something incredible here, but I want more. I want to make it official. I want to spend the rest of my life with you, sharing everything. Joy, sorrow, work, laughter, and quiet nights like this." "Ethan, I want that too," she said softly. "I want to share everything with you. I want us to be together no matter what comes." Ethan took her hands in his, feeling the warmth, the life, and the love within them. "Then we will," he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. "We'll face whatever comes, together. This ranch, this land, this life, it's ours. And it always will be." The following weeks were filled with preparations for a simple, heartfelt celebration. Friends from neighboring ranches were invited, and the ceremony took place under the wide-open sky, surrounded by the land that had brought them together. They exchanged vows that spoke of trust, commitment, and the love that had grown slowly but surely over months of shared work, challenges, and quiet moments of connection. As they stood together, hand in hand, the sun setting behind the hills, Ethan whispered to Clara, "I'd trade 10 herds just to feel you once." Clara smiled, tears glistening in her eyes, and leaned into him, knowing that every word was true, every moment earned, and every hardship faced had led them to this perfect point in their lives. Their story did not end with grand adventures or sudden wealth, but with something far more meaningful. A life built together, a love forged in trust, understanding, and shared resilience. The ranch continued to thrive, the animals healthy, the fields green, and the cabin warm with laughter and love. Every day Ethan and Clara faced the world together, knowing that they were no longer alone, and that together they could overcome anything. Years later, when they looked back on the life they had built, they remembered the cold nights, the storms, the moments of doubt, and the choices that had defined their path. But most of all, they remembered the moments of trust, the quiet gestures of care, and the love that had grown slowly, patiently, and strongly between them. The plains stretched endlessly around them, but their hearts were full, their souls intertwined, and their lives forever changed by the chance meeting that had brought them together. The ranch was no longer just land, no longer just a place of work. It was a home, a sanctuary, and a testament to the love that Ethan and Clara had found in each other. And as they stood together watching the sunset over the hills, they knew that whatever came next, they would face it side by side, hearts united, and souls unbroken.